You're listening to the Confidence Coach Podcast, episode 88, Healing Anxiety with Nutrition. Welcome back to the podcast, guys. Today I have Stacy Younger with me. She is a holistic health coach that specializes in anxiety, and I have heard her message and I love everything about it. So I'm pretty excited to take a deep dive into this conversation, learn more about who Stacy is, what type of people she helps, her story, her business, all the challenges and struggles that go along with being an entrepreneur and overcoming your own challenges. So thank you, Stacy, for coming. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Let's hear a little bit about you.
So much for having me on. I'm so excited to be on here. So I really appreciate it. So you want to hear my story?
Yes, take the floor. Let's hear all about you.
All right. So my story, I would say I was always kind of like, a very fearful child, but I never really, thought I had anxiety or anything like that. I was the quiet one, the shy one. And my anxieties really didn't come to play until about 14, 15 years ago. And I had two very small kids. And I was also living in Colorado. We had a very rough winter and we lived in an apartment on the second story. And I decided not to take my kids up and down those snowy stairs. So we stayed inside a whole lot. And so I wasn't getting vitamin D. I wasn't getting fresh air. I wasn't connecting with humans. And back then, people really didn't hang out on the computer too much. There wasn't much for social media. And so I started experiencing some really weird symptoms. And back then, anxieties was not talked about whatsoever. And I would feel like my heart was about ready to jump out of my, chest, and I would get lightheaded. And then I started getting these irrational thoughts. And I seriously thought there was something wrong with my heart. I really thought that there was, something wrong with it. And so I eventually went to the doctors, and the doctors, told me, that I was healthy as can be. I just had anxieties. Well, because anxieties weren't talked about back then, I knew a couple things, and then I have later discovered that the little that I did know wasn't true. So when they told me that I had anxieties, I thought the doctor was crazy. I thought she was nuts. I'm like, there's no way that I have anxiety, because I thought weak people got anxiety. I thought crazy people got anxiety. And I'm like, I'm not crazy. I'm not weak. This doctor has no clue what she's talking about. And she tried to prescribe me with anti-anxiety medication. And I said no. And I pretty much left. And I was in denial for 6 months. And the bad part is because I thought there was something wrong with my heart, I was deathly afraid to fall asleep at night. So I got insomnia because of it. And it was just really scary. And I was scared for like 6 months. And finally I had enough. And I was like, I'm going to do some research. I'm going to prove my doctor with my research I don't have anxiety. There's actually something seriously wrong with me. And the more I researched, I discovered that my symptoms fit anxiety to a T. And so I'm like, dang, now I do have anxiety. And it was kind of hard though, because then I was like, okay, so this does mean that I'm weak and crazy. And I do now know that that's not true. But back then I'm like, I'm weak, I'm crazy. I was embarrassed. I was ashamed by it. And so I kept very quiet about it. I didn't tell hardly anybody. I told like my husband and a couple of very close friends of mine, that I had it, and that was it. And so for years I went on and off, with having moderate anxiety, and it was just, frustrating. And then fast forward to 5 years ago, I went through a very stressful situation. I became estranged from my parents. I will not go into too much details because there's two sides to every story, but it took a big toll on me. It took a really big toll that I became estranged from my parents. And I also get debilitating migraines. And so both my migraines and my anxieties went completely out of control, and one was feeding the other. So it's like my migraines were causing my anxieties and my anxieties were causing my migraines, and it was this big vicious cycle. And it was just really, frustrating. I have 2 kids. I felt like I couldn't parent them properly because I am not able to function. And it got to the point where with my anxieties got so severe that I could barely drive. I could definitely not get on the freeway, and side streets were stressful, and I could be a passenger, but even a passenger, I was still totally stressed out. I could barely go to the grocery store by myself. And there were some days where I flat out couldn't go to the grocery store by myself. I would actually have to ask my husband, hey, can you go grocery shopping with me? Because my anxieties are so out of control. I almost got to the point where I almost didn't leave the house. And I knew that I couldn't do that. I couldn't get to the point where I couldn't leave the house because I have 2 kids. I have responsibilities. I need to be able to take them to and back from school. I need to, be a parent. I have responsibilities. And so I was really frustrated, and I've never been one for medication, but I got to a point where I was just so desperate. And so I went to the doctors again, and she ran a bunch of tests and said, again, you're healthy as can be. You just have anxieties, have some, anti-anxiety medication. At this time, I'm like, I'll take it. I need something. So I took the anti-anxiety medication, and it made my already severe anxiety 10 times worse. It was horrible. The best way that I can explain it is physically, I felt nothing, and emotionally, I felt everything. It was just so bad, and I could only just lay on the couch and do nothing. So I immediately stopped taking the medication, and I'm not totally anti-medication, but I do feel as a society we're way over medicated, and we can talk some more about that later if you want. But
sure, because I feel the same way.
But I think there's a time and a place. But so I stopped taking the medication, but then I'm back to square one, and I'm like, okay, now what? And so one day I accidentally stumbled across an article, and it was talking about what was in our food. And it blew my mind because I thought there was gross stuff, stuff that I didn't want to know what was in our food, like maybe, cow butt or like a chicken beak or bugs or something. But I didn't know that there was actually harmful, toxic stuff in our food. And I don't believe just one source. So I really started just researching everything. And the more I researched, I was just astonished of what I was finding. And I was like, oh my gosh, we have some horrible stuff in our food. So I decided to change my nutrition, my lifestyle, but mainly nutrition. And I was thinking, this is probably just going to help my migraines. It's probably not going to help my anxieties because anxiety is all in my head, right? At least that's what I've been told. And so I started really changing my nutrition, and it helped both. And I was so surprised that it helped both my migraines and my anxieties, and it just really just blew my mind on this. And so that's pretty much my, my story. So.
No, I love that. Okay. So what were some of the nutrition changes what are some of the biggest nutrition changes that you made?
So, all of my changes I made, and I started doing everything in baby steps. So the first thing I did was I actually got rid of soda. So I eliminated soda. I can't even drink soda anymore. I get too jittery, and it's way too sweet for me now. I just started slowly eliminating processed stuff, and trying to slowly bring in non-genetically modified foods, and slowly brought in more organic foods into our food or into our house. And so that was mainly what I did. And then I started really concentrating on bringing more veggies and fruit and eating more whole foods. And so those were the biggest things that I did.
So when do you think was the time that you were like, oh my gosh, now I'm starting to feel better? Like what day did you wake up when you're like, nutrition has everything to do with this?
Um, after I discovered that I had gone more than a year without a migraine, and then I started just feeling better, like I was able to drive again. And I can't remember exactly what day it was, but I was like, I can drive. And it took me, it didn't just happen overnight, but I realized, hey, I can take my kids to school without stressing out. Hey, I can go to the school loop, and not totally lose my mind. And then I started, slowly getting, okay, now maybe I could drive on the freeway. There's just something about the whole driving thing that really, was huge for me. And just to go back, one thing that I didn't mention when you asked me about food, I did find out that alcohol was a major trigger for my anxieties. And that was something that I ignored for a while, but I realized after a while that every time I drank the next day, I was just, my anxieties were out of control.
Oh goodness. Okay. So for those who are not familiar with anxiety, how would you describe it in the physical body and in the mental body? Could you give us some examples?
Sure. The best way that I normally explain this, which I'll go more into details after this, but the best way that I always explain to people is imagine, and this is for severe anxieties. And so imagine the time that you're most terrified. So you were the most scared in your life. And imagine feeling that for no reason or for a really small reason. And to me, that is what I always felt, when I was experiencing severe anxiety. And for me, my symptoms were a lot of times I would get really, really lightheaded. I would feel like my heart was about ready to jump out of my, my chest. And I would just almost feel like I was going to float away. Like, I know that, I'm not going to float away, but I still felt like I was going to float away. And I just had these irrational thoughts. And even while I was thinking these irrational thoughts, I knew they were irrational, but I couldn't stop thinking them anyways.
So what are some of those thoughts? Because I know some of the women that listen to this podcast or some of the women that I work with, they have irrational thoughts about what will happen if this happens or what people think. So what were like the reoccurring thoughts for you?
So I keep going back to driving because that was such a big deal for me. But I was always like terrified to drive because every time I got behind the wheel, for some reason, I would get lightheaded. And so I would get lightheaded and I was thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to pass out while I'm driving. And if I pass out, then that means I'm going to cause this huge, horrific car accident and I'm going to hurt so many people. And so this was like a reoccurring thought that just kept happening over and over again. And another irrational thought is before I, came to, or when I was in denial of my anxieties, I thought that there's something wrong with my heart. And I thought that I was going to die in my sleep because I thought I had a heart condition. And so those were a couple. And then, just little ones, I always thought that people were judging me and that people were probably looking at me like, oh my gosh, she's having a bad hair day, or, who is she to do this? Or why is she here? Type of thing, And so those are a few of my irrational thoughts.
So do you still catch yourself having those thoughts every now and then, or are you just kind of like free and clear?
I do, but it's a lot better now. But, still definitely will have some of those thoughts. With the driving, it has improved drastically. It has improved big time. And I will get a hair anxious, here and there, but I'm not as worried about causing a car accident anymore. Definitely don't think I'm going to fall or have a heart attack in my sleep. And once I accepted that it was anxiety, that went completely away. And, I was always like, I can't remember a time where I wasn't worried that people were judging me. And so that was so ingrained into my head. And I feel like I have made so much improvement, but I still have a lot of ways to go, if that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense because, you know, and you and I have talked before, but you know, you have to be constantly learning and growing, right? If you're not growing, you're dying. And so there's always room for improvement. It doesn't matter who you are, what area of life you're working on, there's always room to make improvement. So when did you make the shift from experiencing this on your own to where you're like, I can help other women with their anxiety? Walk us through that.
So I actually, not so much anxiety, but I have to kind of go back to migraines for a second. I had a couple of friends that kept developing migraines, or they kept having migraines. And I'm like, I can help you. But they kept looking at me like, who are you to help me? And so, you know, that kind of, you know, hit me, and I'm like, okay. So I went to school and got a diploma in holistic health practice. So now I have something to back me up. And when I got out of school, it's like, I want to help everybody with everything. But then I kept hearing a few like high-end business coaches say you should niche. And I was like, you know what, that's a really good idea. I should niche. And I just was not really interested in niching in migraines, and in a weird way almost felt like I would keep manifesting myself migraines, and once I have a migraine I'm done, you know, type of thing, to where I feel like once I have anxiety, I, you know, I have the right tools to get myself out of a panic attack and all that. But I just felt like there were so many misconceptions when it comes to anxieties. And I know when I was having anxieties, I felt alone. I didn't really, because a lot of people out there who have anxieties, they are so embarrassed and ashamed, just like I was, that they don't talk about it. So there are so many women, especially out there, that have anxiety that are just not talking about it. And I was amazed because when I finally came out and said to the world, hey, I have anxieties, I had so many people, even people who I consider to be so confident, so badass, come to me and say, I have anxiety as well. And my mind was just blown. And so pretty much niching, I decided I want to help people with anxiety because I want to bust some of these misconceptions, and I want people to know that they're not alone, and I want them to know that there's nothing wrong with them.
I love that. I love that. So how did you get started? Were you just like, I'm going to start talking about it? Because I know a lot of like my listeners, they get caught up on perfectionism and, oh, I'm not that confident. Like I need to have this first, or I need to have that first. So tell me how you got started.
So thankfully, I followed a few people that kept saying action is better than perfection. And they also would say start messy. And there's a kid yelling out there, so if you can hear that, I apologize.
But no, don't worry. My husband's grilling and my daughter's out there yelling. I'm like, you can probably hear dogs farting and who knows what else. It's all real life. It's totally cool.
So, but I was lucky that I followed a lot of business coaches first for some reason. And a lot of them were talking about starting messy and, you know, do action better, or action is better than perfectionism. So I just really, you know, really learned that. And I started talking about it, and I actually started my podcast really, really early in my profession. And I was like, I'm just going to start messy. And I actually just talked about this today. My first episode, I said so many times that if somebody were to do like a drinking game, even if someone was like had a high tolerance in alcohol and they did a drinking game, they'd be dead by how many times I said from having alcohol poisoning. It was so bad.
I love that. I always ask, like at the end of a sentence, I'll say, right? And I listen to a couple of my podcasts and I'm like, holy smokes, like I say right all the time, but whatever. It is what it is.
Better with the ums. I don't say as much, but mine is so. I also say so a lot. And so
I say, yep, I'm the same way. That's totally cool. Okay, so start messy. You just kind of dive in. Mm-hmm. How long have you had your podcast now?
I've had it a little over a year now.
So walk us through that process. What called you about a podcast versus like a YouTube channel, or like just starting on, I guess I'm assuming you have Facebook and Instagram and stuff like that too.
I have Facebook and Instagram. So, and now I'm saying so again.
Now we're going to be hyper aware of it.
I know.
It's totally cool though. No worries.
I did podcasting for several reasons. One, I would love to do YouTube, but, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but I'm a busy mom, and I would always feel like that I would have to do my hair and have makeup on and I think I would get more into perfectionism doing a YouTube thing. And so I just was not really into doing YouTube and being in front of the camera. And I used to be a photographer, so I'm more comfortable being behind the camera instead of in front. And I think I would just, I don't think I could follow through doing a YouTube. And I tried doing blogging, but I can write, but I just am not a big writer. So I decided to do podcasting because I love that people can multitask while they're listening to a podcast. And also, I was considered to be the quiet one and the shy one, and I'm still in the process of finding my voice. So to me, running a podcast is a great way to find my voice and to finally share, my opinions and everything that I'm thinking of. And so that is why I got into podcasting. But
I know, and I totally hear you. I love podcasting. I always say that podcast or for the multitaskers, because when I watch YouTube, I feel like when I'm watching videos on YouTube, I feel like I have to actually sit down and watch it. Versus like podcasts I can listen to in the car, and you can even listen to a YouTube video in the car, but I feel like you have to be watching the video. And so I fell in love with podcasts because I could listen to them when I was exercising, when I was walking, when I was doing the dishes, when I was driving. I used to, before I left the corporate world, I had like a 45-minute commute, one way, sometimes an hour, depending on construction. I could listen to a lot of podcasts in that time. So, all right. My question for you is, what fears came up, if any, when you started to put yourself out there about anxiety, migraines, holistic health?
Okay, so I have a really good story here.
Okay.
So I've mentioned before that I was the quiet one, the shy one, and that I was always so deathly afraid of what other people thought of me. And I had a friend one day tell me, she was telling me, you need to start, doing like workshops and talking in front of big crowds. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. I am deathly afraid of talking in front of crowds. I cannot do this. So I decided, I said no at first, but then she put that seed in my head, and I'm like, okay, well, I need to start getting used to talking in front of crowds. And even though it's not technically a crowd, it's still to me kind of like a crowd, is Facebook Live. And I was like, I'm going to do my very first big live. And all these fears started coming up. Oh my gosh, are people going to judge me? Or am I going to do horrible? Are people going to, say horrible things? Am I going to, stumble over my words? Am I going to just do absolutely horrible? And so I really talked my way through it. And I'm like, look, you might do horrible, but what if you do horrible? What's going to happen? Mm-hmm. And so I really started thinking about this. And then I was like, okay, if people judge me, well, if they're my friends, well, they're not being very good friends. And if they're strangers, well, okay, who cares? So I did my first Facebook Live, and guess what? I did horrible. I was so petrified. I was shaking so hard. My face was bright red. I was forgetting to breathe. So, I was doing probably that horrible noise going a few times because I just could not, and I did horrible, and nobody judged me. Everybody was so excited for me that I actually did a Facebook Live, and it actually gave me a really, really good feeling. It was like, this is something that I was petrified of doing. I did horrible, but I did it. And I was so, so excited. And I still do Facebook Lives. I'm still not the most comfortable doing Facebook Lives, but I keep getting better and better doing them. And so I keep using that example now every time I want to face a fear, is like, okay, even though I'm afraid, still do it. And having that, oh my God, I was petrified or I was terrified of doing this, but I did it anyways, is such an amazing feeling. And I'm still here to live the tale that I did a horrible, horrible Facebook Live, and I survived.
No, I love that because that just goes back to the start messy. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I have kind of a similar story. Like now I do enjoy, the speaking on stages and,
Mhm.
the whole platform and I love Facebook Lives. Now I love Instagram Lives. It never used to be that way. The very first time I ever did a speech, I was in middle school and I was talking about putting butterfly clips in your hair and how to do like this hair thing. And I was shaking, I was sweaty, I was red in the face. I was sweating so bad that I had like the pit stains, you know what I mean? And I had like a shirt where you could like see it. And as like a young teenage girl, like, I don't know if I ever lived that down, but now here I am. And, it just shows that even if you're scared and you just do it anyways, it's progress, not
Right.
perfect. Right. And the more you do it, the more you can flex that muscle and say like, hey, it's not so scary. I live to tell it. So I love that.
So
What other challenges do you think you faced when you started your business, or were you just like, oh, I'm a business, let's do this?
there's a lot of times where when I was starting my business, like making posts, like there's a couple times where it's like, oh, are people really going to like my post? Or I have this one friend who I consider her my mentor. She's like a holistic health coach too, but she's been in the field a lot more than I have. And I'm like, oh my gosh, am I going to post something that she's going to totally disagree with? Is she going to, call me and say, no, that's not right, type of thing. And so making posts, and finally I guess to this point where I'd almost just close my eyes and be like, post and be like, okay, it's done. And it's really crazy because nobody has really so far has said they hated my post. Yeah, there's some posts that I've definitely have like very little like interaction or likes or anything like that. But nobody has, come right out and said, I hate your posts or anything like that. And my friend says that, I actually told her this a couple months ago that I was, petrified of that. And she goes, no, I always love what you're doing. And so, it's just amazing. And it's really interesting. I don't know why, but I've never had that imposter syndrome. I'm not sure why. I don't know if it's because I feel like I've dealt so much with my anxiety and I've overcome so much. So no, I just want to share with everybody. And I know that there has to be some other, challenges, but I'm drawing a blank at the moment.
No, you're fine. And sometimes it just comes easier to other people, especially when you just take action and you're just like so focused on what the next step is versus getting caught up in the, how do I do this or how do I do that or what the logistics are. And I think that saying even in the beginning, like, I'm doing it messy, like I'm just doing it, is the most important thing, because people can get caught up in perfectionism. People can get caught up in that imposter syndrome. And I think sometimes that imposter syndrome comes from a lack of self-worth. And I was there at one point because I would tell myself, like, who am I to be able to teach this? Who am I to be able to do this? But when you start to, take that deep dive, you can overcome those and be like, oh yeah, I am worthy. I do have all these tools and strategies. So speaking of tools and strategies, what are like the biggest tools and strategies that you've used to help you heal your anxiety?
Well, really quick, talking about, the whole, business side, I think one of the biggest tools that I did is, and I know I don't want to encourage a lot of social media time, but I did a lot of observing other business people. So I think observing some of these business people really helped me figure a lot of things out, and just, that not business wise. My biggest tool is nutrition. Nutrition is my jam. Feeding my body the right foods is huge for me. I can feel sometimes if I moved not too long ago, and when I was moving, I didn't eat the best, and I could start feeling that my anxieties were starting to creep up a little bit. So nutrition is huge for me. I love meditation. Meditation is so important to me, and a lot of times when we have anxieties, I feel like we have all these thoughts that are so disorganized and they're just all over the place. And when I meditate, I just feel like all my thoughts are still there, but it's more organizing them, and it's kind of making it easier to deal with, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense.
And so movement for me, which I need to move more, but movement is so important for me. And one of the things I know most of the times right now, if I start to get anxious more times than not, it's because I'm not moving enough. And so I need to get outside, move some. Not getting enough sun is so bad for me. So one of my biggest tools is getting outside, getting in the sun, getting some vitamin D, moving my body. And so those are like my biggest tools, is just, nutrition and moving, and definitely, working on having a really good mindset.
Yeah. So would you say that those are things that you work on with your clients, or how did you develop your program and or whatever you offer your clients?
The biggest thing that I offer for my clients is, I think a lot of times people struggle because they're trying to fix all their problems overnight. And so my biggest thing is I have them do baby steps. We always do baby steps because I think that is so, so important. And I know I would always try to do things overnight, and I would always fail. I would never follow through. So I started doing baby steps. So I have them do that. I have 3 pillars that I always go through, and that is nutrition, movement, and mindset. And I think it's so, so important, to feed your body with proper foods and, strengthen the nervous system. Make sure you're feeding your gut good food, because your gut and your mind definitely communicate with each other. Movement, because if we're not moving, we have all this energy in our body that our body is, providing for us. And if we're not doing anything with that energy, it has to do something. And more times than not, for us anxiety sufferers, it's going to go right to anxieties. And so I feel that, a little more often than I'd like to. And then for mindset, what we're thinking is so important. And so I try to teach them, definitely be grateful. I think something a lot of people with, mental health struggles is they're always looking at the big things, and why don't I have these big things, and, what's going on with these big things. And so I try to really make them look at the little things. What is little, in your life? And it can actually add up. The little things are not really also little. We're just feeling like they're little, and being grateful for things, and, dealing with things with perfectionism and comparison, and, overcoming fears, and overcoming, being judged and all that kind of stuff.
Yes. No, I love that. And, you talked a little bit about in the beginning how, I can't remember what exactly it was that you said, getting your voice or something along those lines.
Right.
And so to me, I feel like you have a pretty solid voice. You have a
thank you.
I think you have a great message. I think what you're doing is amazing. And I would say that you're very confident in your abilities and what you're putting out there into the world. So how did you gain this level of confidence that you have right now today?
I'm going to keep, I almost feel like I'm going to keep saying the same things, but
no, you're fine.
It's strange, and I think people are going to think, that I'm pretty strange for saying this, but nutrition is huge. And I just feel like nutrition has helped me out so, so much. And people might think, well, how did that make you confident? But when I don't feed my body right, my nervous system is, not as strong as it should be. My gut is not as strong as it should be. And so I start feeling really, really bad. And I get brain fog. So I can't focus. I can't, concentrate on what I'm doing. So I feed my body really, really good food. I do move. I do make sure that, I get out in the sun. The sun is so important for me. I'm very sensitive when I don't get enough sun. And I just have really, really, in the last couple of years, have worked on my mindset as well, and just try to get it really, really strong.
I love that.
So it's taken me, I've been working on my voice for probably the last 5 years. And so it's been something that, it definitely did not happen overnight. If you would have met me 5 years ago, I was a completely different person 5 years ago.
No, that's perfect though, because I feel like so many people see, these quote overnight success, or like, oh, how did she get from here to here? And the truth is that you take action steps every single day. You're constantly working on yourself and learning and growing and flexing that, that confidence muscle or whatever it is that you're working on. It doesn't just happen with the snap of a finger.
And some days I still have bad days, I did an interview not too long ago where I kept butchering it up. I was doing the I was doing an interview, and I swear I kept stumbling over my words, and I was just not asking the right questions. And so I definitely have, my bad days, but thankfully today I'm having a good day.
No, and I think it's being able to, I don't even know if balance is the right word, but being okay and being in alignment with like, yes, some days are great, some days aren't so great, and having, just grace and being kind with yourself and saying like, okay, today sucks. That's okay. I can do again. I can try again tomorrow,
Right.
So tell me what's coming up next for you. What's the next step for Stacy?
So I offer, at the moment, I'm offering one-on-one coaching, but I am planning probably the end of May of starting group coaching. So it hasn't been concrete. I'm still working on all the details on all that right now, but at the end of May, I'm really looking into group coaching to help women overcome their anxiety and to just live a healthier life.
That's awesome. So what do you want to say to that woman that's listening to this right now?
I would like to tell that woman that that they are definitely not alone. I know when I had anxiety, I felt so alone, and that there are so many options. I think a lot of people think that medication is their only option, and there's nothing wrong with medication, but there are other options. And like I was saying before, I just feel like we're so over medicated. And I do know that I followed this lady who said she had severe depression, and she tried everything under the sun holistically for her depression, and nothing worked. She finally started taking depression medication, and it worked for her. So yes, medication is fine, but there are other options out there, and it's not just medication. And just to know that there's nothing wrong with you. And I know this is easier said than done, but you shouldn't be embarrassed and you shouldn't be ashamed of your anxiety, because like I said, you're not alone. There are so many people out there that are struggling with all sorts of mental struggles right now, and it's not just you.
Nope. I love that. And even on like the topic of, healing yourself either holistically or with medication, you just have to find what works for you and not listen to what society tells you, but listen to what your body is telling you.
Right.
And really on like a cellular level, these symptoms are a chemical imbalance based on either, hormones or the foods that you're putting. There's some root cause to it. And so whether you can, a lot of people probably want to try to heal that holistically, but that doesn't work for everybody. And then that's when you have the other options where Western medicine comes in and can help you feel good about yourself and your mental state. And that's what's most important, is how you feel at the end of the day. So
right.
I absolutely love that.
So thank you so much.
Yeah. So how do people get a hold of you? I know you have a podcast, so tell us a little bit about that.
So I have a podcast, and I've been actually very lucky to where I've been interviewing so many amazing women, including Sasha. And I started it about a year ago, a little over a year ago. And just today I uploaded my 100th episode. So I'm really excited about that. It is called Holistically Healing Anxiety. And then I have a website called Holistically Healing Anxiety. And I have a free Facebook group that you can join that is called Holistically Healing Anxiety Community. And you can find me on Instagram at Stacie, that's STACIE .younger. And I think that's all where I am.
Your Facebook group, I'm going to have to hop in that group. I didn't know you had one of those. Tell us a little bit about that.
So it's actually not as active as I would like it to be, but I've actually had some people contact me saying, we see what you're doing, but we're too shy and embarrassed to make comments. So there's not a whole lot of action in there, but I do share a lot of stuff. I've been doing a lot of Facebook Lives in there recently. I share posts. I share some recipes here and there. I do a lot of mindset posts, but yeah, it's mainly a lot of Facebook Lives in there. So trying to get better at that.
No, that's practice makes progress. And I find it interesting that you say that, because there are a lot of people that are scared to reach out because they're fearful of what will people think if I comment on this, or is so-and-so paying attention, or whatever story it is that's running through their head. And so it's just important to understand and know that people are watching. Watching. They see you show up every single day, and just because they're not acting on whatever it is that you are asking them to do right now, but having those calls to action, or, you know, those invitations to say like, hey, I'm welcoming you into this group, into this tribe, and to let you know that you're not alone, gives them that inner dialogue where they're like, okay, I see what she's doing. I'm taking notes. I'm still taking action. I may not be taking action to where you can see it, but I'm sure you have people reach out to you that say, thank you so much for this, and this. So
I actually got one of my clients because we were acquaintances before I changed my lifestyle. And then she joined my Facebook group, and she was very quiet. She didn't really, communicate on there. And then she started listening to my podcast as well. So she was in my group and my podcast. And then she saw me. She says she saw me do a 180. And she goes, okay, now I need help. And so she helped me. And so, like I said, I don't have a lot of action in my Facebook group, but I know that there's people watching, because I've had people contact me and say, hey, I've been watching, thank you, but I just can't comment or like or anything like that. So that's what gets me going, and that's why I keep posting stuff in there.
Exactly. And it just building that momentum, and you keep showing up, and just knowing that you're making an impact in at least one person's life every day. And then that will come full circle. Somebody who is watching you today may not be ready to, commit to like a one-on-one, but that doesn't mean that you're not giving value, and that they're not going to be, a client 6 months from now, or a year from now, or 2 years from now. And just so being open to the mindset or the thought of that anything is possible and opportunity is everywhere. You just got to keep showing up, showing up for you and showing up for your following. So I love that.
Thank you.
All right, cool. Well, I really, really appreciate you coming on here and sharing your story. I know sometimes it can be hard to talk about, the vulnerability part and where you were at, but you've overcome a ton of challenges, and you've managed to, turn your passion into a profit and impact many people's lives. So I really appreciate this.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much for having me on here. I actually love sharing my story now, and to let people know that they're not alone and that there are options.
I think that's very important to let people know that, hey, there's others out there just like you, and finding that sense of community and that tribe, and to let them know that they don't have to suffer, and they don't have to do any of this by themselves.
I love that you brought that up, because I've heard so many times, this is my new normal. And I'm like, it doesn't have to be your new normal. Having anxiety doesn't have to be your new normal. And I actually have some friends that have other illnesses, and they're like, this is my new normal. And it's like, it doesn't quite have to be, so I love that you just brought that up.
Yep. I feel like when I see those people, I almost want to like shake them and just be like, no, it doesn't have to be this way.
Me too.
But yes, I love this. And everybody go over, follow Stacy, join her free Facebook group. If you're interested in working with her one-on-one or her upcoming group coaching, I will put all of her contact information in the show notes so you can contact her directly. If you have any questions, make sure to go follow her podcast, Holistically Healing Anxiety. I will also put that link in the show notes for listeners to hop on over and follow you. So again, thank you so much. I loved this. And
thank you.
I'm so happy that we were able to connect.
Me too. Thank you so much.